Really?
Fuck no. Sorry. We are uncensored, but oh my God.
18 seconds. That's how long the images allegedly stayed on screen before producers cut to commercial. 18 seconds of photos that observers claim showed a version of Meghan Markle the public was never supposed to see. Not the polished duchess, not the humanitarian actress, but a woman in private Soho House gatherings, surrounded by faces that insiders say belong to some of the most connected power players in London's elite circles. And it all starts with a manila envelope, so deliberately plain, so carefully delivered to Piers Morgan's production office 3 days before the broadcast, that his team allegedly spent 48 hours verifying what was inside before deciding to air it. No one expected Piers to actually do it. He'd ranted about Meghan for years, called her fake, called her calculating, questioned every move she made. But this was different. This wasn't opinion. According to sources close to the show, this was documentation. Physical proof that allegedly connected Meghan to a world she'd spent years trying to erase from her history. The broadcast started normally. Piers at his desk, his usual commentary about the royals, the kind of monologue viewers had heard 100 times before. But then his tone shifted. He leaned forward, his expression hardening, and allegedly said something that made his producers tense. "I want to show you something. And before the lawyers start calling, these came from a source I trust. Make of them what you will." The screen changed, and for 18 seconds, according to viewers who recorded the moment on their phones, images flashed across the broadcast that reportedly showed Meghan at what appeared to be exclusive Soho House events, intimate gatherings, late-night parties, surrounded by men and women whose faces, some claimed, belonged to British aristocracy, media moguls, and figures connected to circles that don't appear in tabloid photo spreads. Then the feed cut. Commercial break. When the show returned, Piers was back at his desk, stone-faced, and the photos were never mentioned again. But the internet had already exploded. Screenshots circulated, questions erupted, and Meghan's team, according to insiders, went into crisis mode within minutes. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, plain manila, no return address. Security allegedly ran it through standard protocols. No threats, no suspicious materials, just photographs. Dozens of them, printed on glossy paper, dated on the back in faded ink, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016. A production assistant reportedly opened it first, glanced at the contents, and immediately took it to a senior producer. Within an hour, it was on Piers Morgan's desk. He allegedly spread the photos out, studied each one carefully, and said 5 words that would change everything. "We need to verify these immediately." The images, according to sources who saw them, weren't scandalous in the traditional sense. No nudity, no illegal activity, just Meghan Markle at private Soho House gatherings, Toronto, London, New York, mingling with people whose names don't appear in public guest lists. But it was the context that made them explosive, the circles she was allegedly moving through, the connections she was reportedly building, the narrative they contradicted. For years, the story has been simple. Meghan was a working actress who happened to meet Prince Harry. Luck, timing, a blind date set up by a mutual friend. But these photos, if authentic, allegedly showed something more deliberate. A woman who was already positioned in exactly the right social circles, attending exactly the right events, meeting exactly the right people, years before Harry came into the picture. One photo in particular caught Piers' attention, sources claim. Meghan at a Soho House London event in 2014, standing beside Marcus Anderson, the mysterious fixer, who would later introduce her to Harry. But in this image, allegedly taken 2 years before that introduction, they looked comfortable together, familiar, like people who'd known each other far longer than public timelines suggested. Piers' team spent 2 days trying to verify authenticity. They reportedly reached out to former Soho House staff, people who'd worked events during those years. Some refused to comment. Others allegedly confirmed that yes, Meghan was a frequent presence at private gatherings. More than frequent, she was reportedly described as strategic about which events she attended and who she positioned herself near. One former staff member, speaking anonymously, allegedly told researchers she wasn't just there to socialise, she was working the room, always near someone important, always making sure she was visible to the right people. That claim couldn't be independently verified, but it matched a pattern that was emerging from the photos themselves. Meghan always positioned near influential figures, always in frame with people whose connections could open doors. The decision to air them wasn't made lightly. According to insiders, Piers argued with legal for hours. The risk was enormous. If the photos were fake, his career was over. If they were real but obtained illegally, lawsuits would bury the network. But Piers allegedly believed the source was credible, the images authentic, and the public had a right to see what he described as the truth about how Meghan really entered that world. The broadcast went live at 8 p.m. For the first 40 minutes, everything proceeded normally. royal commentary, political analysis. Then Piers shifted, his expression changing, and the photos appeared on screen. Viewers who recorded the moment described seeing 6 distinct images flash in quick succession. Meghan at what appeared to be a Soho House Toronto rooftop event, 2013, surrounded by men in expensive suits. Her hand on one man's arm, leaning in close, laughing. Meghan at a London Soho House gathering, 2014, standing with Marcus Anderson and 2 other individuals whose faces were partially visible, all of them holding champagne glasses. The atmosphere intimate, exclusive. Meghan at what sources described as a private Soho House event in New York, 2015, seated at a corner table with 3 people, one of whom observers claimed looked like a well-known British media executive. 3 more images, all from various Soho House locations, between 2013 to 2016, all showing Meghan in settings that suggested she was far more embedded in elite social circles than her public narrative acknowledged. Then the screen went black. Commercial break. Social media erupted instantly. People who'd caught the broadcast started posting screenshots, analysing the images, asking questions. Who were the people in those photos? Why had these images never surfaced before? And most critically, if Meghan was this connected to Soho House circles years before meeting Harry, what did that say about the chance encounter story the world had been told? Meghan's PR team responded within 17 minutes, according to reports. A statement released to select outlets described the broadcast as reckless, the photos as potentially doctored, and threatened legal action for invasion of privacy. The statement notably didn't claim the photos were fake, just that airing them was inappropriate. That distinction didn't go unnoticed. Behind the scenes, sources say chaos erupted. Meghan's lawyers allegedly began working to identify the source of the photos. How had they been obtained? Who had access to private Soho House event photography? And critically, what else might be out there? The mystery deepened when researchers started looking into Soho House's archive policies. The club is famously protective of member privacy. Event photos are typically kept internal, never published, rarely distributed. Yet somehow dozens of images from private gatherings had ended up in a manila envelope on Piers Morgan's desk. One theory that emerged, according to insiders, was that the photos came from a former Soho House employee, someone who'd worked events during those years and allegedly kept copies as insurance or documentation. But no one came forward. No source was revealed. The envelope had arrived anonymously, and whoever sent it made sure they couldn't be traced. What made the situation more complex was Marcus Anderson's silence. As Meghan's alleged close friend and the man who reportedly introduced her to Harry, he would be the natural person to defend the timeline, to explain the photos, to clarify what those gatherings were about. But Anderson said nothing, released no statements, made no public comments. That silence, insiders say, spoke volumes. 3 days after the broadcast, several of the screenshots that had circulated online mysteriously disappeared. Accounts that posted them reported violations. Image hosting sites took them down for alleged copyright issues. Within a week, it became increasingly difficult to find clear copies of what had aired. But some people had saved them, archived them, and those who studied the images carefully started noticing details that made the story more complicated. In several photos, Meghan was allegedly wearing jewellery that wouldn't have been within her price range as a working actress. A bracelet one observer claimed looked like Cartier. A watch that appeared to be Rolex. Small details, but ones that raised questions about how she was funding her presence in these elite circles. Another detail that emerged: in at least 2 of the photos, Meghan was allegedly wearing outfits identical to ones she'd been photographed in at public events weeks later. The same dress at a charity gala, the same blazer at a Hollywood function, as if she was testing looks at private gatherings before wearing them in public, or as if the private gatherings were the real priority and public appearances were secondary. Piers Morgan, for his part, doubled down. In interviews following the controversy, he reportedly stood by his decision to air the photos. "I showed what I was given," he allegedly said. "If people don't like what they saw, maybe they should ask why those photos were taken in the first place." His network, however, distanced itself almost immediately. A statement described the broadcast segment as not in line with editorial standards and said it was being reviewed. But the damage, or the revelation, depending on perspective, was already done. The photos vanished from mainstream circulation within 2 weeks. Copyright claims, privacy violations, legal pressure that sources say came from multiple directions simultaneously. But the questions they raised refused to disappear. If Meghan was this embedded in Soho House elite circles years before meeting Harry, what did that say about the narrative of their relationship? Was it really a blind date arranged by a mutual friend? Or was it something more calculated? A connection that was allegedly engineered through years of strategic positioning in exactly the right social spaces. The palace said nothing. Harry said nothing. Meghan's team released one more statement, calling the entire incident a manufactured scandal based on misleading imagery. But they never explained what was misleading about it. Never clarified who the people in the photos were. Never addressed the timeline questions the images raised. And sources close to Piers Morgan's production reportedly said he received follow-up packages after the broadcast. More photos, more documentation. But his network allegedly refused to let him air any of it. Too risky. Too legally dangerous. The first broadcast had nearly cost them everything. One detail that emerged later, according to insiders, was that the original envelope had contained something else besides photos. A typed note. No signature. No identification. Just 3 sentences allegedly reading, "These are copies. The originals are secure. There's more where this came from." That note was never made public. But people who allegedly saw it described it as a warning to Meghan's team, to the palace, to anyone who thought this story was over. Someone out there had documentation, proof of a past that didn't match the public narrative, and they were willing to release it piece by piece. The most chilling detail came from a former palace aide, speaking months later on background. After those photos aired, the source allegedly said, there were conversations at very high levels, not about whether the photos were real, about what to do if more came out, about how much of her past they actually knew, versus what they'd been told. That admission suggested something darker. The possibility that even the palace, even Harry's own family, might not have known the full story of who Meghan was before she entered their world. That the vetting process, the background checks, the investigations that should have revealed everything might have missed something, or chosen not to look too closely. Within months, Piers Morgan left his network position entirely. The official reason was cited as mutual decision and creative differences, but insiders claimed it was about the photos, about pressure from sources they wouldn't name, about making an example of what happens when someone airs what they're not supposed to show. But the images had been seen, the questions had been raised, and the silence that followed, from Meghan, from Marcus Anderson, from anyone who could have explained what those gatherings really were, only made the speculation grow louder. For those paying attention, the pattern became impossible to ignore. This wasn't just about photographs from parties, it was about access, about how someone allegedly positioned themselves for years to be exactly where they needed to be, when they needed to be there, about connections that were built long before fairy tale narratives suggested they existed. The cameras showed an actress who became a duchess. The photos allegedly showed something different. Someone who was already moving through royal adjacent circles, already building bridges to power, already positioned long before a blind date that may have been far less blind than the world was told. In the 18 seconds those images were on screen, a carefully constructed story allegedly cracked wide open. And Meghan Markle, who'd spent years controlling her narrative, lost control of it completely. The photos were gone now. Scrubbed, removed, legally buried. But the questions they raised remain in the quiet spaces between official statements and public denials. And somewhere, according to that anonymous note, the originals are still secure, waiting.